I want to share with you this evening a realization that I have about our engagement with our use of technology and science in the environment. And I want to do that by looking at my experience with social history. Interesting that we are 2 slides advanced. Okay, well, anyway. I was born and raised here in the middle of the United States. And in my small Mississippi River town in the early 1960s, I remember holding my hands high above my head as a little child and pushing the lawnmower as my grandfather guided it behind me. I love the beautiful peonies of my grandmother, the smell, and the brilliant green grass, you know, when you're a child, and the big, bright skies of the Midwest. Now, about 900 miles away in D.C., a father of another child about my age, President John F. Kennedy, was looking out his Oval Office window and watching the rain come down outside, and he said to his science advisor, you know, is it true that it's coming down in the rain out there right now, that stuff? And he had been getting clarity on radioactivity poisoning citizens of the United States. And the science advisor said, yes, it is true, that's what the report states. And this depressed Kennedy immensely. It's documented. And he, he went on to make decisions under this realization that had far-reaching and swift effects that have come to characterize global change since the dawn of this nuclear age. And the report said that radiation was coming out of these nuclear explosions from our tests of weapons, and it was entering into the atmosphere, and it was falling down out of the skies, and it was getting into our food supply. The report was the result of the St. Louis Baby Tooth Survey. And people from all over our region, people like us and perhaps some of you, donated their teeth to be surveyed and analyzed. And it's really a phenomenal occurrence. But it comes out of an organization that a few years earlier, in 1958, had sounded the alarm. They became very concerned about this radiation possibility that was poorly understood. This group called alarm to a situation that they saw as pernicious and not being dealt with squarely, and they started questioning the story that there was nothing wrong with this. So the small group actually comprised of lay people and medical professionals and professors at universities. They got to be really concerned about a myth that was being used at the time in the United States. And that myth was that this residual radiation from these nuclear tests had no real effect on life in general, and certainly not humans, that in fact it was necessary to use this testing technique of nuclear weapons in order to keep ourselves safe from our enemies. So the committee was questioning about this dangerousness and the lack of risk. And the committee, which actually involved many people of specific professions that were very helpful, they had skill sets that were useful. There were biologists and chemists and physicists. They were understanding at this time that what they needed to do to bring a comprehension to the American population was to bring together compelling information, accurate information that they saw wasn't coming out, and presenting it to the public so that the public could influence the policymakers, the decision makers of our country, politicians and civic leaders of all sorts, and business leaders. But the real problem here was that people had just come out of the Second World War, right? And a lot of people remembered the terror that was inflicted by the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese on the rest of the world, and they knew that there were great risks to not defending yourself, to not building up your defenses. They saw that it was very important to develop these weapons, and it was something that political leaders and much of the public understood, but now even more so they understood that communism was probably a greater threat than the Nazis and the Japanese were. That communism threatened all of democratic society. So, and now the communists were also developing their own bomb and doing their own tests. So in this climate, at home, the problem was, if you were going to go and stand against this information, this political pressure with information like radiation is bad for you, you had to stand up against a complex social structure that put pressure on people to conform. If you said some things that were contrary to the government policies, especially about the development of these nuclear weapons, you might be branded a communist and a traitor. So some of what these brave people did in this Committee for Nuclear Information, they circulated petitions, they wrote appeals, which you can see here. They got the word out as best they could. They did a lot of lecturing about radiation hazards in the public, and they knew that there was some information that was very, very important to share about the nuclear tests and the fallout that could come from them. They knew that there was dust and debris, for instance, in a nuclear explosion of a bomb or a missile, whether it's being tested or implemented in warfare, that gets sucked up into the air. So thousands of tons of these tiny particles get sucked up into the air in that characteristic mushroom cloud that we know. And that radioactive isotopes are produced, so radiation is produced in that nuclear explosion. And those radioactive isotopes, like strontium-90, cesium-137, iodine-131, those would be produced in these nuclear events, and that some of those isotopes had a long life. They had long-lived radioactivity. So strontium-90 was one of those that was particularly pernicious. And they knew that these clouds would carry over into the atmosphere and disperse, and then eventually that radiation from the isotopes in the atmosphere would come down out of the skies and land on our food supply, land on us, get into our bodies, possibly cause cancer, birth defects, premature births. And this was something, of course, that not everyone fully appreciated, the contamination of food and it getting into ourselves. So a lot of these tests were happening in the American Southwest. By the end of 1958, there were 300 tests that had been performed, and 196 of those were by the United States, much of them above ground. Much of them happened right in the American Southwest. Of course, in 1945, the first bomb was exploded at Trinity in New Mexico, testing for the atomic bombs that were going to be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But testing continued and sometimes in earnest, and persisted in the Nevada desert test sites. And it would, the fallout radiation from those tests would carry over the United States with prevailing winds going east. And much of it would fall in an unpredictable pattern, but what was found by the date of this slide, which is 1962, that much of it was falling in the dark area of the United States, here on the map, which is right in the middle of the United States, and St. Louis is one of the hot spots on that map. In fact, it was shown that of radiation present in milk, that of the 10 cities tested, St. Louis was the hottest of them all. So this all promulgated the Committee for Nuclear Information to start the St. Louis Baby 2 survey. And they circulated these cards in a very ingenious way. They got a lot of volunteers to put these cards out to the public. They went to community groups, schools, public and parochial, went to the administrators. The administrators were charged and accepted the charge of getting that information to the parents at home, that we needed your children's teeth because the strontium-90 was deposited just like calcium in bones and teeth. And with teeth that fall out, ones that aren't, that are easy to analyze, you can see just where that strontium-90 is ending up, and you know that it comes from these nuclear fission reactions if you find it there. So what they want to do is test and find out if this was going to be true. There's no proof yet that this was true. So it was an innovative study, had never been done before, and it happened right in St. Louis. So the volunteers circulated, they got the word out, there were public airtime, service announcement airtime on radio and TV. The Mayor, Tucker, even declared a baby tooth survey week. And so they had the charge of these volunteers. They had to divert the regular supply that the Tooth Fairy was getting and bring it in another direction, which is no small task. There are a lot of little kids. They're very invested in this, right? Tooth Fairy and coin under the pillow, as is our tradition, and contribute those teeth to the advancement of science. So by the end of the survey in 1971, it continued for many years, there were about 320,000 teeth donated from all over the United States, not just St. Louis, but many of them right here in that community. But in fact, people contributed from around the world, Japan, India, all over the place. So as a reward to the children, they got a little button, which is something like this one, that would be kind of the payoff that I gave my tooth to science. And that actually is very effective. A lot of people that I've interviewed recognize that, hey, that was pretty big deal. I wanted one of those buttons. And when I gave up my teeth, I got one. So it's pretty neat. So these teeth needed to be documented when they were sent in. The parents used a card like this. You can see a tooth taped to the card. And it had the card on tear-off portions, and one side there was the address of where the child was living. They also needed to record where the child was born, where the mom lived while the child was in utero, and what kind of nourishment the child got, what kind of milk, whether it was mother's milk or some other kind. So all this stuff was recorded, and it was very carefully done. And there were clinicians, lots of dentists involved, who donated their time to document and study these teeth and grind them up and analyze them for strontium-90. And one of the results that they found was there's a direct corollary between the atomic bomb testing, the nuclear bomb testing, and strontium-90 in teeth and when the child was born. So fascinating to find here is that by 1964, when there was a halt to testing, there were 50 times greater the levels of strontium-90 in the donor's teeth than there were in 1950 when the bomb testing really began. So as it ramped up, as the testing ramped up, the strontium-90 ramped up in children's teeth. Also, there was a corollary between milk, how much strontium-90 was in milk they found in other tests, and the strontium-90 level in the teeth. So they published this information in journals. They got the word out. Peer-reviewed journals, this got a lot of notice worldwide. And this documentation was what got to President Kennedy and the US Senate. The CNI, or Committee for Nuclear Information, the citizens group, published their own information in their own publications, and they made sure that that information was out there. They lectured on it and so forth, and it was very effective. That was instrumental in the Senate approving and President John F. Kennedy signing in 1963 the International Partial Test Ban Treaty. Above-ground testing was stopped. So some of these people are some of my heroes. It's amazing what they did. They really achieved some great things. They organized, they got the word out, they changed public policy that nobody thought could be changed. They acted against the social norms of what pressures were being put on them to conform to not question, to not do anything. So how did they do it? You know, they put their mind to the fact that they were responsible. They knew that they understood the meaning of this and the ramifications, and they communicated with one another, and they took up that charge, and they organized, and they got the word to others. That is a hugely important thing. And I think that one of the principles, the underlying principles of their work was that if you're the expert, if you in the public know more about science and more about what's affecting this earth and life on it, not just human beings, life on it in general, you can be effective in changing the public policies. So I think this is really a call to action. You know, once you have these facts, you're an expert, you can start asserting this. You have that responsibility to do that. It's something that we can do today, and I find is hugely important because of all the pernicious problems we're dealing with. You know, we've got catastrophic climate collapse upon us because of elevated carbon levels in the atmosphere. Similarly interesting issue. We have, you know, mercury in our streams and getting into our bodies because of the use of coal-based fuels. Petroleum chemicals and other synthetic chemicals getting into the environment and causing disruption in the hormonal systems of animals and plants that take up that chemical that is coming from our sources. Our consumption, our population numbers and growing are some of these issues that we have to grapple with and look at in a similar way. And I think that one of the things, and I'm going to call out, I don't know where my daughter is, but this is to mortify her. This is a photograph of my daughter, who's a little older now. And one of the things as a parent that I see is recognizing how this is so important for our future. We have to act now. We can't leave it for another generation. This is our responsibility. So I think that you can look. I don't want you to feel defeated about this. This is something so important for you to do something in your everyday life and find ways of working with others on. One of the ways that I've done this is I've joined years ago and have been volunteering for an organization called the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, which is a direct outgrowth of the Committee for Nuclear Information. It eventually became the Committee for Environmental Information. The Missouri Coalition for the Environment was founded by some of those same people, and with a very small staff and a lot of volunteers and scientific experts and the advice of legal experts. We make a very significant change to some of the pernicious problems in our community. So that's acting locally, and that's a hugely important thing, I think, for people to do, to find a way to act locally. We still live in the St. Louis community with a huge problem from the development of the atomic weapons. There is something like 8,700 tons of radioactive waste from the development of the first atomic bomb sitting in the Missouri River floodplain, about less than 2 miles away from the floodplain, subject to groundwater fluctuations and the next flood, and about 8 miles upstream of our water supply. So working with people in the community, there are people in these neighborhoods that are affected by these things at Westlake and Coldwater Creek. These are the people that are, like you, seeing that this is an issue and are communicating about it using the tools that we have today that we didn't have in the 1950s and 60s during the baby tooth survey. We have amazing tools of communication, of sharing information virally around the world and getting information and understanding more. We understand more about physical properties in science. We understand more about biological processes. These are some of the things that we can use and avail ourselves of that we didn't even have in the 1950s and 60s. So that's one organization. Another is the National Resources Defense Council. A national organization does something very similar. And Environmental Working Group, much like the Committee for Nuclear Information and eventually the Committee for Environmental Information, it does research that nobody else is doing and applies it and gets it out there so you can look for these people and find out more and get more information. And as you probably know, 350 parts per million are what we're faced with as an upper limit of carbon dioxide particles in the atmosphere. And if you have more than that, you risk these catastrophic climate effects, this energization of the Earth's climate. 350.org is wonderful at working worldwide to get people connected, get them information, and get them active to change that. So what will you do? Very important, I believe, is to have courage to play to your strengths, use your talents, your abilities, creative talents. You already have skills. What are they? Just like the people in the Committee for Nuclear Information. They were helping in the ways that they knew how and applied themselves. And act in concert with one another. Act in community, act consciously and meaningfully, act in concert with the biology which underlies our very existence. So be that change that you want to see in the world. Thank you.